Alright guys, in this video we're going to talk about shows back in the 80s, what it was like then versus the shows we have now. They were completely different. There was a lot of different activities. There was a lot of different cars. Everything was different. So we'll just talk about this in this video. It's got a great storyline, so stick around. Make sure you hit the like button. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe. The subscriptions on YouTube are free. I noticed on like Instagram you have to pay. On YouTube it's free, if you didn't know that. So anyway, let's get into it. My favorite shows back in the 80s were something called inter shows. And what they were is at Orange County Fairgrounds, they have this little courtyard with, I think, 4 buildings that go around it. And in the middle of the courtyard, they'd have stuff going on outside, and then they had stuff going on inside. So the thing I really liked about it was the swap meet was actually indoors. And the shows started at totally different times. Like now, our shows like typically start in the morning. They would start, they start at like 7 o'clock in the morning, and everybody kind of burns out by about noon, and then they leave. These shows would start at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So it was completely opposite, of the way things are now. I think they started about 3 or 4 o'clock, and they went on till about, I think, around 10 at night. And then I remember driving home to Riverside from Orange County after that. So I can't remember exactly what time they stopped. Maybe it was 9, 10 o'clock, somewhere in that area. And the swap meet was always pumping because it was inside. So we'll go over that in a minute, because there were some cool things that happened back in that time. I had a bus back then in the early 80s or mid 80s. Early to mid 80s, and then I had a Beetle at the time. I had a couple of Beetles. In fact, I would buy them and fix them up and sell them. It wasn't really a car flipper necessarily where I would buy them and just flip them. I did some of that, but I bought a lot of cars and then just would fix them up and sell them back then. Now, you got to go back to the history of the time. Beetles, where you could go to the dealership in the 70s and buy a brand new Beetle. So in 85, say, 75 Beetle was only 10 years old. So it might have been just getting its first engine. So there was a lot of daily driver cars out there. And they did not enter in the shows like today, where the cars that would enter in the shows were show cars. There were some original ones, like you'd see split windows and stuff like that, and they would a lot of times be original. And then you had also all different types of oval windows and split window bugs, Beetles, where they would be lowered, and Fuchs and whatever. It was more cow bug look than now. The other thing that you would see in the shows that was totally different is there was a lot more custom paint. There's a lot more pinstriping, things that are gone now. You did not see patina cars at all in the shows. If it was original paint, it was usually really pristine original paint. You did not see very many. You'd see original cars sometimes, but there was none of the sanded off paint patina look that you see now. So that was not there. Another thing that wasn't really there in any of the shows, and it was very rare that you'd see one, was buses. So there were some buses, but it would only be a 23 window or 21 window. There would never be a combi bus ever in a show. I don't think I ever saw one at all back then, other than the parking lot. So you had your show that had all the really cool like show cars, and a lot of times they would put them up on stands, and they'd put mirrors underneath them, and there'd be display going around the car where you had like they'd have like ropes or whatever going around the car so you couldn't get close to it, and they were judged and everything else. So you had, cars that would have their wheels taken off and mirrors underneath, and they'd have custom painted pans. You'd have, Recaro seats in a lot of them. Again, it was, Beetles were not that old. We weren't trying to restore them. They were daily drivers. And a lot of guys some of these were daily driver show cars. Some of them were just plain show. So the car show itself was all show cars. It was not just drive your car to the show and get in the event like you do today. There was a lot more spectators then that would come in. In fact, a lot of times I was a spectator. Sometimes we'd enter a car in the show, and then we'd come in our spectator cars. And of course, we had Beetles. So the parking lot was pretty cool. There was a lot of really nice cars in the parking lot that weren't in the show. Like now, they would be in the, everybody kind of enters into the show. If you have a classic car, you just go in the show, even if it's not like restored to the nines or whatever. Back then, like I said, it was all show cars in the show, and the parking lot had some amazing stuff in there. So you'd see buses in the parking lot. You'd see lowered buses or daily drivers. Very few bay windows would actually drive to the show, but there'd be some. It was mostly, if you had a split window bus, it was your daily driver. It was your, you'd have your surfboard inside or whatever, and it was just ratty old buses that we would think were really cool today. It would just be normal, outside in the parking lot. And the show would have all show cars, and then you'd have all your Beetles. So the courtyard at the fairgrounds where the four buildings are, they kind of do the Sand Sports Show in those buildings. If you've ever been to that part, the Sand Sports Show uses the same area. But the courtyard would have cars going around it, like all lined up, and some nice ones, or maybe the ones that weren't quite as nice. Maybe the original restoration ones would be out there. And then all the show cars where they're jacked up with the wheels off would be inside. So there was two buildings. I believe I don't know if we used all four buildings. I think we used 3 of the 4 buildings, if I remember right. And 2 buildings that would always be show cars in them. And then you had the courtyard that had some show cars outside to look at. So as it got cooler in the evening, we'd walk around the show part. And then in the middle, there was like tables set up, vendors for food and that sort of thing. And then they would have a bikini contest almost at every show. So today, that's gone. So it was like either bikini. Well, I don't think they did wet t-shirt. I think it was just bikinis, if I remember right. We stayed a little bit more normal than some places. They did wet t-shirt contests, which are really a common thing at some of the regular car events. We kept it a little bit cleaner and had bikini contests. And believe me, the bikinis that some of these girls wore were very, very small. So there would be, during the bikini contest, I was like, I'd see the bikinis, whatever. I like, they can go to the beach and watch this all day long. So I would be always going to the swap meet while that was going on and trying to get the deals, going to versus going to the bikini contest. I always felt kind of weird watching, these women, show off in front of everyone, and all the guys are yelling. I was just like, not really into that. So I used to go into the, I left that stuff for home, right? So I would go into the show, to the swap meet during that time, and that's when I usually would get a lot of my stuff during that time. So another thing that they used to have at almost every show, even smaller shows, the big venue, this is mostly to the inner shows that I'm going to talk about right now, but they would have at that show 2 different things that they don't have now. And they didn't have this at that show very often, but most other shows did. They had an engine blow contest. And what the engine blow contest was, we would take an engine with junk parts, nothing in it was good. Okay. So like it'd be an old crankshaft, wallow out the bearings. You never tell anybody what you were going to do. Somebody would donate a blow engine. And we would, take the bearings and kind of open them up enough, maybe just put grease on them to put it together. And a crankshaft that was toast on its last leg. Sometimes it was a 40 horse crank. Sometimes it was a 1600, I remember like one guy had mismatched heads. So he had like single port on one side and a dual port on the other side. So you'd see all these really creative built engines, and they'd make them run, and you would place your bets by raffle tickets, I think, on how long the engine was going to run. So you'd pay $1 or $2 or whatever. It was all, I think, $1 back then. Maybe you'd get two, and you'd put in your thing on how long the engine's going to run. And so we would fire up the engine, and it would run sometimes 30 seconds, and then sometimes that sucker ran 10 minutes sometimes with absolutely no oil in it. And they might not even have an oil pump on it. It probably just put the cover on, and you just watch these things just smoke, and there used to be just crazy. You'd think the thing was going to blow up. And, and then sometimes they did. Sometimes they'd throw a rod and it'd go through the case and everybody's screaming and yelling. And sometimes it would just seize, usually that's what would happen. But it was really fun to watch and to gamble on how long the engine would run for. So, like I said, some of them lasted 10 minutes with no oil. And then some of them lasted 30 seconds or less. So it just depended on how it was put together, what was in it. It was a whole bunch of things like that. And we wouldn't know. We wouldn't be allowed to know what they did inside. So it was fun to gamble on. So they had those. Engine blow contests, gone. No more. Another thing they used to have back in the 80s was engine removal and installation contests. So what they do is they'd have two guys to remove the engine and put it back in. So first thing you have to do is get in the car, start it up, okay, back it up, I don't know, about 20 feet, 20 or 30 feet, maybe it was 50 feet, I can't remember. They had a line and everything. You back it up so far, and then you jack it up, take the engine out, put it on the ground, and then I don't know what you determined how long it was on the ground. There was and then the ref or whatever would say, okay, you can put it back in or whatever. It was like once it touched the ground so far, it was so many feet away, like a little line on the ground, I think it was, and you backed it up past the line. Then you put the engine back in the car, okay, and then start it up and drive it back up the 50 feet. They had this at the inner shows a lot, and that was called I forget what it was called, the engine removal contest. And guys got into that, man. I mean, there was guys doing that in like 3 minutes. They would back the car up, take the engine out, pull it out, touch the ground with it, put the engine back in the car and drive it forward. I remember like 3.5 minutes being a time. And it was crazy. I couldn't believe that they could do it that fast. And so, I don't know if they had their own cars to do it in. I couldn't remember. I can't remember that part. But they did have these engine removal contests that guys would get into. Comment about that if you used to go to those. The reason they'll probably never have engine blows anymore is because, now we're trying to save anything we can. Cases and all that are so expensive. Not very often you're going to have enough parts to put together a blow engine. Would be cool to see, but you probably would ruin a set of heads or something like that, where, back in the old days, there was always cracked heads, tons of them all around. And now, maybe People are buying new heads a lot, so you might not have all the parts to put together a blow engine. So we probably won't ever see that again. The engine removal contest would be kind of neat. I think the reason that they did that back then is the cars were pretty much daily drivers. So guys then were always removing engines and repairing them, putting them back in. There was always that stuff going on in shops. So the shops would, bring their guys down. Hey, we can beat that guy, whatever. And they would have that contest where I don't think that will happen again either. I never went to the bug-ins back then, but I believe they had that there. You can always comment that below. I don't know. I never went to it. They always just had the drag racing. I might have been to one bug-in. I remember going to OCIR where they had them, I think once. And I don't know. I just wasn't really into the drag racing thing at that point. So I was into the shows. Building show cars back then was what I liked to do, or contribute to them. There was always stuff in our shop that would be in the show. Another thing you'll notice from back then is the crowd. If you look in the audience, and the crowd was a lot younger back then. So there was a lot more teenagers at the show, or early 20s guys at the events. Because again, we were using the cars as daily drivers. So us young guys, it was a cheap car to own, a Volkswagen. So we would all show up there, and it was just kind of fun. And so it was always younger people. They bring their girlfriends. So the crowd was totally different than what you would see now too. There was one of the bikini models was actually, if you guys remember, she was killed in the 90s and by some photographer or some crazy thing. It was Linda Sobek. She was actually there. I remember seeing her. She was hot back then. We were all, wow, she is just so. And she used to be there doing, like, at a lot of the shows. They would do a lot of photo shoots at the shows because the cars were all set up. So they would have bikini models go around and get with the cars and kind of lay over the hood, or I don't know. They do all kinds of little poses around the cars for the magazines. So most of your magazines back then had a bikini model or some sort of model on the cover or in the magazine, in several different places. And Linda Sobek was one of them. And I remember her, I remember talking to her back at one of the events. And there was an ambulance, like a 55 ambulance there that was at the show that was really cool. It was all chromed out and stuff. Not like, you would see today. Everybody would do it all original. It was a 55 barn door ambulance, I think, or post barn door. I can't remember. But it was a 55, so it could have been either one. And she was doing stuff around it, and she used to sit there and do like signatures on your posters or whatever, and that sort of thing. So at the swap meet, I remember walking the swap meet, and back in the day, I had to kind of confirm some of the stuff, what was the guys who used to be there, because I was like, man, and so we kind of talked about it. And I used to see, because I was one of the only guys that was really into buses. There was only a handful of us that did buses back then. There was Doug, 10-Foot Doug was around, but he kind of came in a little later. There was Charlie Hamill and his brother. He used to hang out. And I can remember he used to walk into the building where the swap meet was, and to the right, usually they would get along the wall. Along the side to the wall, to the right inside the building, you'd walk in and you'd go along the right of the wall, and there'd be Charlie and his brother with their double cab selling parts. And I used to buy stuff from them. And then and then Charlie was telling me about this, and I remembered it because I was like, he goes, yeah. Then Doug came in, 10-foot Doug came into the event, and I remember I think he was like almost right in the middle of the whole swap meet, and he was selling stuff way cheaper for buses than Charlie and his brother. And Charlie's over there picking up a bunch of emblems sitting there, and he goes, how much are these each? And he's starting to grab them all. I'm like going, dude, leave something for me, man. He's like, and then I ended up buying an emblem from Doug back then for my bus, because back then, our emblems were getting stolen. On the buses were worthless. They weren't really, didn't have any value. You could fix a bus up all you wanted, and all you get back is what you paid in parts. You couldn't, on a Beetle, I could fix them up and then sell them and actually make $1,000 or $500 or something like that. And at the time, that was, a chunk of change. So I did a lot of that. But buses, it was only mine. So, and there was this constant loss of bus parts. They would steal the taillights off your early bus. So I bought cracked taillights on purpose from Charlie, and then I put them on my bus because I had the early taillights, the round ones, and then I bought another emblem from Doug. That's the only two things I remember buying, but I bought a bunch of different things all the time. But I remember buying the emblem from Doug, and put that on my bus because my other one had gotten stolen. And what I did is I welded the threaded rod or a bolt on the tabs. I just welded a bolt on there. And back then, you had to gas weld it, or I had to take it to the shop where they had a MIG welder. Not many people had them. So I MIG welded or gas welded the bolt on my emblem. And that way, if somebody went to pull it off, they would pull it off and it was like a leash. They'd pull it off and it would, and so I had like three of these bolts on there, and they would just give up and walk away. So I kept on seeing my emblem hanging off. And that's what we did back then to get people to not steal your emblem, because it was a big deal. People were stealing them. They didn't even have a bus, but they just, bedrooms full of emblems, all kinds of crap like that. But Doug, 10-foot Doug, they call him, and Charlie were both around at that time. I don't remember. I just remember Rich Kimball. He had the BFY shop. He used to be all around those, but he didn't run them. So there was a different guy that ran those. Now the Classic came up in the 90s, I think. And at that time, I wasn't doing VWs. I still had VWs. I was still working on them, but I wasn't going to shows. And the reason why I wasn't is I was really broke right then. I had lost my job in 1991, and in 91, 92, the Gulf War was going on, and it was a really, really hard times economically for me. It was just really bad. I'd work a little bit at the bug shop, and I started getting into painting houses in around 92 or 93. I was doing real estate loans in there too. So that's basically how I stayed alive. And I got out of being a mechanic altogether. I just didn't want to do that anymore. I was just disheartened with the whole thing because there was just any money in it. Not like there is now. You can make pretty good money as a mechanic, but back then you're looking at $25,000 a year, and my friends in construction were making $40,000 a year, and I was like, I'm not gonna, work for this kind of money anymore. So I got into doing house painting and buildings and stuff like that. Started making more money. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. And back in those days in the show scene, it was, it was just different. It was, a car show was a show car. It wasn't, it was full of show cars. There wasn't just everyday drivers going in. It wasn't just whoever shows up. It was like the concourse d'elegance type of thing. It was those kind of cars that were there, but they were all customed and stuff like that. The guys would chrome like tons of stuff underneath. You know, they would do things that they don't do today, you know, where guys are just restoring them original. There was hardly any. There was some, like the early cars, the split windows, they would restore them original, but and even some of the ovals they would do original, but most of them were custom. So it was just a different time, different game, and it was not the same as it is today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like, share, and subscribe if you haven't done that. And I will talk to you on the next one. I hope I didn't miss anything on the car shows of the time, because they were definitely different. Make your comments if you remember any of the stuff that I missed, or maybe some of the things that elaborate a little bit about what your experiences were. And we'll talk to you in the next one. Please like, share, and subscribe.